Amon's Adventure 23. It's called The Preacher. He had watched them all afternoon, the pilgrims, Jews coming from Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover in 2 days. In steady streams they had come from every direction, long lines of donkeys and camels and people on foot. When the city was filled from wall to wall, they began to camp outside in the Kidron Valley, and on this closest side around the pool of serpents. Amon had watched all this from atop the hill. From here, he could see all of Jerusalem and the mountains beyond. Even now, late at night, he could make out the lines of the wall, the buildings, and the temple. Outside the walls, there were hundreds of campfires and families who settled in for the night celebrating their holiday. When the wind was just right, he could hear the music and the singing. But none of this interested Amon. He watched it as he might watch ants building a nest. It was a thing that was, not a thing to be interested in. Where Amon sat was the flat top of a boulder just at the crest of the hill. He hadn't moved from that spot all afternoon and evening. He considered that he might never move again, though he did wish he'd brought a skin of water with him. What pinned him in place was not a rule or an order or even a desire. What pinned him onto the rock overlooking his home was despair, hopelessness, and fear. Even before he reached the top of the hill, Amon had started to pray to Jehovah. He wasn't sure if God could hear his prayer from a place that had no altar. But there was no altar to pray from on top of the hill, and Amon figured God could be able to hear a prayer from anywhere. Now, late at night, when the city was celebrating and his father was sitting in prison, Amon continued his prayers. He prayed for his father, he prayed for his family, he prayed for his friends, and he prayed that the Messiah would really come and that Caiaphas and all those like him would be stripped of their power. Hour after hour, Amon prayed, stopping only when he'd run out of words. Soon the words would come back to him and he would pray again. Sometime in the night, he fell asleep. When next he opened his eyes, Amon blinked at the glaring sunlight. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the hard rock which had been his bed. Hunger and thirst reminded him he'd already missed 2 meals, and somehow the sunlight made God seem a little closer. Maybe his prayers of the night were doing some good. He stretched and yawned and then climbed back down the hill. It was then that he heard a voice. From somewhere below, Amon calculated. Not far, not near. He continued more slowly, trying to make out the words. It sounded like a speech or a teaching. At last, Amon reached the top of a boulder, just at the height of a tall building above the plain. From there, he saw the back of the speaker, a man, around the corner to his left and below him. The man was sitting atop another boulder, speaking to a crowd of people stretched out from the base of the hill near to the city wall. Amon looked around and found that he was stuck. He would either have to climb down past the speaker and interrupt the proceedings or stay where he was. There was no other route down to the ground. With a sigh, Amon sat on his boulder and waited. And as he thought through the arguments with his mother and Tamar and the words of the speaker around the corner of the hill began to drift into his thinking. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you, the man said. I've done that all my life, Amon thought, but now I find out they lie. Obviously, this man does not know what he's talking about. Amon kept listening. But do not do what they say, the speaker said, for they do not practice what they preach. Amon kept listening. His head snapped around. Had he heard that correctly? Someone preached against the priests? He strained to listen now, to hear the words of the man over the noise of the camels and the donkeys and the children playing. They tie up heavy loads, the speaker said, of the religious leaders, and put them on men's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is for men to see. Amon could not believe his ears. Did this man not know that speaking such things against the priest could get him killed? They loved the place of honor at banquets and most important seats in the synagogue. They love to be greeted in the marketplaces and have people call them rabbi. Amon stood now, curious to see who this man was who could speak out against the most powerful Jews in all of Jerusalem. He leaned far out over the edge of the boulder until it seemed like he would surely fall to the rocks below, but all he could see was the back of the man, an ordinary Jew who seemed very relaxed and in control. Obviously, he doesn't know what dangers he's in, Amon thought. The greatest among you will be your servant, the man said. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Amon stumbled back and sat hard on the rock. Such words as he's never heard before. To preach such a selfless life, a life of service instead of selfish gain. Amon had never heard such a thing, but instantly knew they were words of wisdom. They made sense. They seemed to fit everything he'd ever thought of God. They were wise words, words that made him feel good inside. It took several minutes for Amon to organize all the new thoughts in his mind, to figure out how to make them fit with all that he'd ever believed before. But then a commotion from the other side of the hill drew his attention. Once again he stood and he leaned far over the canyon, straining to see what was happening. In a flash he saw a group of Sadducees and Pharisees, experts in the law, had pushed themselves to the front of the crowd. There was anger in their faces, and Amon could tell they were challenging the speaker. Very well, then, one of them shouted, "Tell us, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Amon sucked in his breath. This was a dangerous question. There were over 600 laws, and to call any one of them greater than the others was considered blasphemy. This could get one man killed. The speaker slowly stood to his feet, as if the answer to this question was a great weight, and he needed all of his strength to lift it. But then he lifted his hands toward heaven, as if such an answer were the lightest burden in the world. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind," the man said, and his words echoed across the valley. "This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." There was a stunned silence for a moment. Then a great cheer began to rise from the crowd. The words of the man had stumped the religious leaders. The words had turned their expression from a trap into a celebration. The words were perfect. The Sadducees and Pharisees stood scowling for a moment, then turned and stomped away. Atop his boulder, Amon jumped and clapped his hands together and shouted with glee as if his team had won the donkey chase. After a few moments, he noticed the crowds had died down, and Amon leaned out to watch again. The speaker was still standing with his hands and face turned toward heaven. As the crowd hushed, he spoke. "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified," he said in a strong but weary voice. "I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life." The speaker lowered his arms. Looking out across the crowd below him, he continued, "Whoever serves me must follow me, and wherever I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me." The man took a deep breath and let it out, as if once again carrying a heavy burden. "Now my heart is troubled," he said. And Amon strained to hear because he spoke softer. "And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour?" The preacher began to pace and shook his head slowly. "No, it is for this very reason I have come to this hour." Suddenly the man thrust his hands forward toward heaven and shouted in a loud voice, "Father, glorify your name." At that moment, the clear blue skies rumbled with thunder, as such Amon had never heard. Then a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere filled the sky. "I have glorified it. the booming voice said, "and I will glorify it again." Amon saw many of the people in the valley fall back in fear, as if the voice would strike them dead. Screams erupted, and Amon himself wasn't sure if he should shake in fear or weep for joy. For the voice he had heard was not a voice of a man, he was sure. It was surely the voice of God. Slowly the shouting from below died down, and Amon's knees no longer could hold his weight as he sank to the ground with a thud. So many thoughts were fighting for his attention that he almost missed the words of the preacher. "This voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. But I," he said with a promise in his voice, "when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself." The man continued speaking for a few more minutes, but Amon wasn't listening. He pieced together all that he heard on this morning and all he had seen. The man spoke words of truth, words that could only come from God. That voice in the sky had come from God, no doubt. Therefore, Amon concluded it could only mean one thing. The preacher on the hill below was the Messiah. Instantly, Amon knew he must follow this man, this Messiah. He would give his life for him if necessary, he decided. He jumped up and he started down the path, ready to fall at the feet of the preacher and commit his life to him. But before he had gone 2 camel strides, Amon skidded to a stop and flattened himself against rocks, hiding because the crowd was shouting, and the single word that spoke chilled Amon to the very center of his soul. He heard them cry, "Jesus!" Their cry reached out, and they heard, "Jesus!" It sang out, and that name alone, as if it could relieve all their sorrows and heal all their pains. "Jesus!" they cried out, wanting every moment's attention from their Messiah. And at that name, Amon slumped to the ground, stunned and confused. This man could not be the Messiah after all. He was just a false prophet named Jesus. Just another fancy talker. An hour later, the crowd had cleared and Amon climbed down the hill. He walked home slowly, thinking about all he had heard. He pushed open the door to his house and he went in. Tabitha sat in a chair, holding Yuri and Jaden tightly. When the 2 boys saw Amon, they both raced over and hugged him. "I thought you would never come home again," Yuri cried. Amon dropped to his knees and looked Yuri in the eye. "Why would you think I wasn't coming home?" he asked. Yuri sniffed and wiped his nose on his tunic. "Because Father went away and he isn't coming back, and then you went away." Amon closed his eyes in shame for a moment, then opened them and looked at his brother. "Yuri," he said, then turned to his other brother, "and you too, Jaden, listen to me. I am going to bring Father home. If I have to fight the entire Roman legion all by myself, and no matter what, I'm always coming home." Yuri sniffed. "Promise?" "It is a covenant I shall keep forever," Amon said. Then turning once again to Jaden, he said, "Go now, take Yuri outside to play a game of snake climber." Jaden eyed his older brother for a moment, then understood that Amon wanted to be alone with his mother. "Yes, brother," he obeyed. When the 2 younger boys had left the house, Amon fell to his knees beside his mother. "Forgive me, Mother, for my behavior yesterday. I acted like a spoiled child." Tabitha put her son's head onto her lap and stroked his hair. "There is nothing to forgive," she said softly. "This has been a very difficult week." Amon tried to hold back his tears, tried to act as though how he thought a man should act, but he could not. The truth was that he was scared to death for his father. "All my life," he said through tears, "I have been able to work things out the way I wanted, to solve puzzles and fix every problem, to keep everything in its place. Now," he added with a sniffle, "nothing I do makes any difference." "Perhaps that is just the place Jehovah wants you," Amon's mother said softly. "Perhaps he wants you to understand that it is your faith, not your abilities, that will save your father." Amon looked at his mother. "How do you stay so calm?" he asked. "For days you've worked around the house and acted like nothing is wrong. How can you keep making meals and cleaning the house while Father sits in prison waiting to be crucified?" Tabitha took a long moment before answering. Because my faith is in Jehovah, she said. I do not know what Jehovah will do, but I do know that he is in control. I have seen his hand at work too many times in my life to give up on him now. I must have faith that he will care for us and for your father no matter what. No matter what. Amon searched her eyes for a moment to see if she truly believed this or if she was just trying to make him feel better. Finally, he decided that she did indeed have such wonderful faith in God. Besides, she said, have you noticed how many meals I have cooked? Amon looked around the house, and only then he noticed that there were stacks of bread and bowls of stew and dishes of parched wheat everywhere. And at that he laughed. You've enough food here to feed all the Passover guests in Jerusalem. He laughed. Tabitha laughed too. It is the way Jehovah has given me to keep my mind busy. Then she turned serious again, to keep me thinking of other things. Amon nodded his understanding, and then his mother said one more thing. I believe there is someone else you need to apologize to, he said, and Amon knew right away who she meant and that he should. It took half the afternoon for Amon to find Tamar and Benjamin among the crowds in Jerusalem. They were watching a fire eater as they themselves ate a honey-crusted pastry. Tamar quickly accepted Amon's apology. Then the three found a quiet back alley to talk about plans. I think you could go to Cornelius again, Tamar said. Me too, Benjamin echoed as he banged broken pieces of brick together. Cornelius already tried, Amon said, and I hate to ask him to put himself out there once more. It's dangerous, and I don't think it's fair. Me neither, Benjamin said. Then I think you need to go to Caiaphas again and plead for your father's life. Me too, said Benjamin, pulling another piece of broken brick from the crumbling wall behind them. Maybe, Amon said, but I don't think he's going to start being reasonable all of a sudden. Me neither, Benjamin said, piling up bricks on top of each other. Amon looked at his younger friend and said, Benjamin, what are you doing? Benjamin looked up in surprise. Me too, he said. Amon and Tamar broke into laughter. Then Amon noticed the hole Benjamin had been enlarging in the wall. He was just starting to get the first seeds of an idea when Tamar hissed, Amon, look! Amon looked to where she pointed and saw two priests and a man coming out the back door of an inn. All three looked carefully up and down the alleyway, obviously not wanting to be seen. What cause is this? Amon asked, wondering why Tamar was so interested in the three. The man in the middle, Tamar whispered, the one between the two priests. That is one of Jesus' disciples. Amon watched curiously as to why a disciple of the man he had heard speak this morning would be skulking around Lower Jerusalem with two priests. What is his name? Amon asked. When Tamar finally answered, her voice was filled with disgust. Here's the after part. Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. John chapter 9, verse 25. How many ways does God need to tell Amon that Jesus is the Messiah before he'll believe? He's already used 2 Roman centurions, a healed cripple, his father's best friend, Jesus' own words, and a voice from heaven. Will Amon ever believe? How much would it take for you to believe? God has probably already sent many people into your life to tell you he's real and that Jesus is the only way to salvation. Maybe he's even performed a few miracles, whether you recognize them or not. But do you really believe, or is there still doubt? Easter is a great time to get rid of those doubts. It's a time when we focus on the miracle of an innocent Jesus dying for the sins he never committed and the miracle of his resurrection from the dead. If that's still not enough for you to believe, maybe it's time to pray to God that he would open your eyes.